Fantastic. How's everyone doing today? Wasn't that a fun way to spend a break between talks? That is definitely a tough act to follow, but we'll do our very best with some very interesting AI insights from some experts across the US. We're joined today here from a variety of experts across a number of different domains. Nobel, would you like to start by introducing yourself and we'll work our way down the panel?
Sure. Yeah, myself, Nobel. I work for ARM. For those who don't know ARM is a semiconductor company. So it's like we design like the CPU of every digital device out there from cloud to edge. So yeah, I do a lot of like AI workload analysis at ARM. Yeah, that's all.
Hi, I'm Jimil. I lead the product marketing and developer advocacy team at Intuit. If you are not familiar with Intuit, Intuit is a global financial technology company that makes QuickBooks, TurboTax, Credit Karma, and MailChimp. I work with the open source team, so we're looking for open source contributors for Argo and Numa Proj, so very excited to be here.
Hi, I'm Numa. I'm the head of machine learning at iVerify, which is a cybersecurity company that's focused on mobile threat hunting. I'm also a lecturer at the University of Texas at Austin, so hook 'em horns. And then I'm the co-author of Introduction to Generative AI, which was published by Manning Publications.
So my name's James Gress. I work for Accenture. I've been with the company 25 years. I've been in software engineering almost that whole time, but I'm currently leading AI capabilities for our advanced technology centers. I probably have overseen over 100 use cases in Gen AI, as well as taken about 4 or 5 of them to production.
Fantastic. So let's start, I think, with a little bit of a relevant and recent conversation, which seems that most of the tech CEOs from the last quarter have spoken about how software engineers are a thing of the past and the future is going to be driven by AI coding solutions. I think particularly with Jensen Huang, Mark Zuckerberg, Satya Nadella, Sundar Pichai, all betting big on this concept and even going as far as reducing the number of jobs they're putting in the market. It'd be interesting to get a discussion, from a wide view of industries. James, do you want to take this one first?
Sure. So I've been thinking about this quite a bit. My next talk is going to be in the breakout room solely on this topic. I feel like we're going to be going much deeper into it. But yeah, you're right. The industry leaders are out there. They're investing heavily into this area, so much that they're betting big on it, right? And I really do feel that the software industry is going to change pretty rapidly over the next few years. Now, I don't think it's going to totally replace software engineering, but I think it is going to drastically change it. But I don't also feel that's really a new thing. When I got my feet wet really in software, I did some COBOL programming, and we're not really doing COBOL programming anymore, right? Things have drastically changed from those days, even though we still have COBOL programmers out there. But if we look at just the evolution of going from COBOL to Java to C++ into Rust and React, these things just have a natural way of evolving. However, I do feel that generative AI is going to change the game on it, on what we are able to focus on and what we're able to produce. I think we're going to be able to produce much faster, as well as I feel that the generative AI is going to fundamentally change even how we deliver software. Meaning I feel it will have kind of that agile moment. So when we went from waterfall to agile, I think we're going to be going to something new in the future.
I think that's a really fascinating take, actually. Numa, given that you spend so much time teaching software engineers, I think it'd be really interesting to get your viewpoint.
Yeah, so I definitely agree that I think there is going to be a shift in this space. Do I think it's going to replace software engineers? No. Do I think that will happen anytime soon? Definitely not. I think that a lot of the AI models right now are probabilistic systems, and they're good at one thing, which is pattern replication, right? They're pretty good at, writing some simple unit tests. They're good at some basic web apps. They're good at writing doc strings for me, which I really don't like to write. They're good at things like that. They cannot actually do systems level thinking. They cannot really do platform engineering. They can't really think through business context or edge cases that you do actually need a very proficient and senior engineer to do. My kind of concern with where we are right now is that what happens to a lot of the junior engineers, right? Because I think a lot of the skills that will be I don't want to use the word replace because I still don't think it's replace, but I think a lot of the skills that junior engineers, I think, need to learn to become, I think, more senior and understand how to do like system level thinking and how to design architectures. A lot of that, I think, is being replaced. Again, I don't want to use the word replaced, is a lot of senior engineers can now use a lot of these coding tools to do a lot of that work faster, and we're seeing less roles for junior engineers to be able to mentor them, to get them in that position to, be able to use them as like human-in-the-loop tools. So my concern is kind of what really happens to a lot of like fresh grads, a lot of junior engineers, and how we actually help them build a lot of these skills that we have as seniors in this field.
It's almost augment instead of replace.
Yes.
That's really interesting. Jimil, I guess spending a lot of time with the developer community.
I am with them. No job or developers are not getting replaced, but I think skills are getting replaced. So, if we flip the terminology a little bit, like there is replacement happening, and it's not just developers. People think about lawyers. People think about counselors, teachers. There's all AI tools out there for it. But I think what has started to become important is like code reviews. So if you're good at it, you might get a promotion. So, start reviewing code, because a lot of your junior engineers or your peers will have these generated codes without the checks being there. And you as a human are supposed to spot check. So if you are that person who gets this gut feeling that something's wrong and you're almost always right, then that skill is going to be very important when you're approving these PRs to make sure nothing goes wrong when this is approved. And of course, there's an AI going to be assisting you with these, but you also have to use your human gut check to make this happen.
That's really interesting, actually. I'd love to know what you think about, particularly because ARM, I think, do some of the most complex software engineering in the industry, right? And actually, some of these things seem like they're low-hanging fruit. Where do you see it in your space?
Yeah, true. Like from the time when the very first Gen AI model released to the time now, they're getting matured and they're getting very smart enough today. So I see the problem. It's not really as a problem, but more like an AI is your friend, so that makes things more productive. So if you're solving a problem or I use AI a lot in my work. So if I solve a problem in weeks before with the help of AI, I'm able to do it in days now. So you're going to be more productive. So AI is going to make things more productive at every sector. Even if you're an engineer or even if you're a lawyer, in every domain, it's going to make things more productive. I see things in that way. So for example, if we lay down the things more at the semiconductor side, so you sometimes around 1980s, the very first microprocessor has been released. So from the time till today, we have been working on big things like a big 200, 300 core processors at the data center level and also GPUs. So we have been working on the complex problems from the time when the real technology started and evolved. So taking that into consideration with the help of AI, which will be like our beside assistant, we're going to deal with solving more complex problems along the way and maybe do great things down the line.
Would any of you advocate for making any change to current hiring strategies?
I think we need to hire people who I think are adaptable and are able to actually think through systems and not necessarily just frameworks or languages. I don't think we need to worry so much about syntax anymore, right? I think it's more people who can solve business problems, people who can think through systems as a whole versus like very narrowly focused on a specific language or framework.
I think that's really interesting, and particularly I think on the sort of conversation of augmentation. We're seeing loads of these new protocols come out that software engineers are starting to use. We're having conversations about things like MCP. And I think the big announcements in the last 3 months would be MCP and then A2A. MCP being an integration framework for data into agents, and then A2A being an agent-to-agent communication. I guess one of the challenges we're really seeing right now is the cybersecurity implications of running an AI, and actually the privacy challenges around AI. Does anyone want to comment on any of those challenges in their industry?
I'll start with the A2A stuff. So I've been reading about it, and I saw like examples where you talk to an agent, a booking agent, and the booking agent is going to book your flight and book your hotel and book your car with 3 different agents. And as I started thinking about it, like my first question was, like, why can't we just use MCP for it? But it sounds like a lot of tools are getting invented or like, out there just to be a leader in the space without understanding the practical use cases of it. And if I were trying to talk to these like booking agents and something went wrong, like if you're a platform engineer, like think about the tracing, like, who made a mistake, and then think about the audit logs, like it's money being involved. So like I spent money and now I have the wrong flight. So did I prompt it incorrectly? Did I prompt the booking agent incorrectly? Did the booking agent prompt the airline agent incorrectly? And how do you go down the stack, try to figure out why it gave certain answers, what kind of tools it used from the MCP protocol. So it's like too early to say like, A2A MCP is going to change the AI landscape. They are cool tools, and we should all learn about it, experiment with it. But we should also think about these are like cybersecurity is another one. If like there's a data leak happened, like you need to understand which AI agent did it. And luckily A2A is shipped with a lot of security features. When MCP first came out, there was no authentication. So I think we are moving too fast and then forgetting that at some point we'll have to slow down and understand like how this is going to come out in the market.
Sure. I'm going to add a few things to this. Yeah, that's true. Like things going to develop over the time. Let's say if we drill down the discussion to the very basic thing, something like HTTP or HTTPS. So we do a lot of web requests every day. A ton of them are going around in the space. So that means a lot of data is being transferred from your devices to the servers, etc. So there has been a lot of encryption that's gonna turn around this data into encrypted format, and then that's gonna get decrypted. So in the similar way with these MCP and A2A protocols, over the time things gonna develop with respect to security, such that your data is safe when it is being traveled or transmitted. And also other thing is that things might go wrong even with the general way as well. I mean, like the usual search is more like you're just searching it, but this MCP and A2A is going to bring more like an generative search. So it works in the same way, but things going to build around it with respect to security and privacy.
Yeah, I think I would echo the sentiments that we are trying to build a lot of really cool stuff without having great use cases for them. I think that MCP and A2A have a lot of potential to be very powerful and be very useful. But that being said, I think that so those systems kind of on their own, right? So just a large language model on their own has its own kind of privacy and security considerations. Now, when you've got a couple different systems interacting, you are, as you're increasing your capabilities, you're also increasing your kind of risk landscape, right? So now you need to kind of think through not just your data interacting with one system, but how your data is being transferred into multiple systems and what kind of what governance looks like there. And without very strict protocols and governance, that has actually the ability to become multiple little black boxes, and that can be very concerning. Like even kind of if we don't even think about just MCP or A2A, even with just a lot of people like wipe coding, there have been so many instances of just like prompt injections and SQL injections, or like malware inserted into open source packages that people wipe code and don't actually review, and then now they've got malware in their system, right? So I think there's a lot of potential for kind of misuse in that space that I think needs attention.
Yeah, so we actually worked with FedEx and with our AI refinery within Accenture and developed a system that just came out just recently. I was reading about it, kind of hit a news announcement, but it's the Trusted Agent Huddle, which uses the MCP and A2A frameworks, but it puts a level of governance on top of that really kind of makes sure that you have secure communication across. It also has a trust algorithm to make sure that is doing what it's supposed to be doing, and you can kind of rely on it. And what I would say to that is, as you start to experiment within your own organization, if you are hopefully large enough, you can start to put maybe a generative AI or an AI COE out there to really start to explore these different types of things. Because as you get into exposing generative AI out there to your teams that are starting to incorporate all these different tools and platforms, they're not going to necessarily always be experts in every aspect of AI, whether it comes to responsible AI or securing AI. You know, they might be very good at like prompt engineering or doing those levels of integration, but you really need to have the expertise or seek out the trusted partners that you have that can bring that level of expertise to your organization.
I think that's a really good takeaway, actually, particularly in an enterprise context. I think security is so paramount. I think one of the things actually we discussed there is standards. And actually one of the things we've seen recently in the news is lots of different airline companies battling to be OpenAI's preferred choice of travel agent. Because actually that's a considerable amount of deal flow. I think one of the things that's becoming really interesting with AI is actually how we avoid vendor lock-in. Does anyone have any thoughts on or advice for people building AI solutions to avoid vendor lock-in?
I think that's really hard because there's 4 companies that are actually building like foundational models right now. So in some ways, I feel like we're unfortunately already there. Yeah, that's all I have to say about it.
Yeah, I'd add that, you know, I think some legislation has to chime in at some point. Because the data being used, we don't know how much of it's our data, how much of it is someone else's, what are the rules around using this data. And with AI similar to processors, like what we are seeing is we are constricted by cost and amount of data you can use to train AI. So cost is already high up off the roof. Data is, they've already used up all the data they can use to train these models. So we're not going to move as quickly unless things like DeepSeek keep happening. So it'll take us like maybe 5 or 6 years to get better or significantly better than the models we have today. In that time, I hope either, you know, from a legislation perspective or from an open source land, we figure out a way where people who don't have the data or don't have the funds get the ability to run these models. Because right now, they're restricted to people who have those 2 things.
Yeah, adding to it, yes, like with respect to the frontier models, we see the open source models still exist. Example, Llama, which Civo Relax AI platform is actually running. But there are like more models like from ChatGPT, O1 and etc., which are not really open source. So this thing gonna go down like the vendor lock and things, but I believe like open source still continue gonna thrive in the space.
Yeah, and I think too, like once you start getting into the space, you'll start to develop what they call like a model garden, right? So you're going to have a number of different models available to you to be able to consume in your applications. Because sometimes you don't need a reasoning model, right? Or sometimes you don't even need a frontier model to be able to do certain actions. You'll want to actually maybe even take a lesser model because it's either cheaper or more performant. So, you know, as you start to look at these different models, you'll start to be able to change which ones you're able to start utilizing over time and really kind of help avoid some of that vendor lock-in. If I look at Microsoft, you know, they're not just all OpenAI, right? You can pretty much provision just about everything in their platform. So if you needed to switch over to like a Google or an AWS, they would likely be hosting some of those similar models over in their ecosystem. So you would be able to kind of switch back and forth a little bit. So I think there are some elements of not having to necessarily be locked in.
I agree. I think autonomy and choice comes at the model layer as well as the application layer. So did you want to?
Yeah, I was going to say, since we described open source models, that is also something that the industry hasn't aligned on. Like, what is an open source model? The open source initiative is working on creating a definition, like what parts of the model do you open source? Do you open source the code base, the vector embeddings, the data itself? But that's like, right now it's still like being decided by the standards team. If you have anything to add there, consumer.
Nothing to add, just agreeing with you.
Okay.
I don't think we see much movement around that. Like, the honest reason why open weights exists is because training data is difficult to share, particularly from these foundational model providers and where they claim to have got the data from. But actually, I think there's a really good choice there around, really interesting discussion there around choice of model. And actually, one of the things we're starting to realize is model accuracy for these large language models is getting harder and harder to increase. One of the things we've seen recently is actually reasoning models do really well. And by continuously using time to compute to be able to refine and improve your answer, you're actually able to get better results. In some situations, though, that uses 50 times the resources as a typical non-reasoning model. With these compute requirements massively increasing, what do we do from a sustainability and resource and even cost point of view to keep these realistic?
Yeah, I could go first. Yeah, so yeah, that's true. Actually, like from the time to the compute bound and memory bound, etc., to we are actually hitting the energy bound sort of problem. So there has been a lot of news and articles coming around the way that the ChatGPT search or a usual AI search is like 10 times of what you do a general search on the web. That's actually true. Taking that into consideration, we have to look into more ways of how we can leverage to save power within the hardware itself by using like different optimization techniques and maybe a quantization stuff around without not hitting a bar on the accuracy. So that's how I would imagine like going down the line. The model's gonna be more refined, but still we're gonna use a lot of techniques to make them more energy efficient on the hardware where they run.
We should just make language models small again. No, but really, I think that most applications you don't actually need a reasoning model or a very large language model, right? So some of it actually just comes down to, well, for most applications, you don't need a language model at all. So I think a lot of it just comes down to design choice. So maybe if you can do, that task with a smaller model, use a smaller model. You don't actually need a reasoning model. There's very few use cases where you would actually need something like that. I also think that as an industry, we're starting to see a little bit of a shift from kind of, building very, very big models to starting to look at more efficient techniques. So things like mixture of methods or sparse models or model distillation or quantization. And I think maybe more investment and research in those areas would actually be really beneficial. And then I think finally, we actually are kind of guesstimating how much a lot of, these models, like how much it costs to train them or for inference. And I think just more transparency around a lot of that and maybe just some standards on, okay, I trained a model. These were kind of my, costs or compute costs and energy costs. And I think just having that as a best practice, not just for the companies that are developing foundational models, but also for companies that are using them, would also go a really long way. Because right now, we actually don't have a very good way of tracking that. And when we can't track it, we don't actually know how to fix it.
Yeah, so I think we can hit this in a couple of different ways. I think DeepSeek was a great example of this, right? So they were able to build a model at 10 times less than, say, an OpenAI model. Now, I don't know if we have the exact numbers, but it was an order of magnitude less. Also, and that was just based on how we train these models and getting better at the algorithms, as well as being able to operate them more efficiently. And I definitely agree smaller models, in a lot of cases, definitely help too. I think the one thing that we're getting into, especially in 2025, is this move to agentic systems, right? And with these agentic systems, I can have different types of either super agents that might use a reasoning model, but I'll also have a lot of utility agents that might just use a very small model to be able to accomplish their task. And so from an organization perspective, you'll be able to start controlling what your spend is, because if you have agents that you can just lower that model down to a cheaper model or more efficient model or more targeted model, it'll really help go a long way in this space.
I was also really happy to see Civo partner with the material science company to make an impact. I think more companies should follow suit and do that. And the second thing I'd like to say on the smaller model train is I'm super excited for the models on the phone. Right now, people are not, even your phone makes calls to OpenAI and doing stuff there, but there's so many things your phone has the compute processing power to be able to do. So I'm hoping that, they become more prevalent and, image recognition, when you're doing FaceTimes, audio transcription, that kind of stuff just happens in your phone. So you're not calling OpenAI and costing the environment a lot of water, electricity, everything.
Yeah, true. Adding to this, over the time, models gonna come into the wearable device and the edge devices as well. We could see some of the spectacles nowadays have AI within it, released by different companies in the market. So over the time, models going to be more efficient, and they're going to, currently all the models is running on the server, and from edge we do the API calls and get the response, but over the time, like when security, privacy, and much more things come into play, some of the models gonna land within the device itself and play a crucial role doing inferencing from there itself.
I think some really good points there, particularly around models at the edge and consumption. Who was in the autonomous software engineering workshop or the vibe coding workshop? We ended up, if that was ran on Claude, that would be $20,000 worth of credits we burned in that room that day. So these things are expensive, cost a lot, use a lot of requirements, and actually I think being responsible developers in AI has never been more important. And actually, moving on to open source, which I think highlighted that very much so, is we are in a really difficult position right now with open source, maybe geopolitically, where actually we're seeing a European model provider, a US model provider, and a Chinese model provider all open source their technologies. And definitely there's some collaboration, sharing of technologies, but there is an open obligation I think we all have as open source professionals to see what we can do to increase that collaboration. Does anyone have any ideas around what we can do to do so?
I can start. I think it is going to be challenging. Like I don't think there's a rosy road ahead of us. For instance, the federal government uses a lot of open source software, especially for security. Like, you know, everyone remembers when the open SSL heartbleed bug came out, there was like a lot of concerns around like use of open source. The EU is facing the same things where they're putting more scrutiny even on open source projects. So when you want to work across boundaries, adoption can be a challenge. But I think like, you know, the step one is to at least like start the work or share knowledge as much as possible, because the worst we could do is repeat the work and harm the environment. The environment has no boundaries. So like if we keep repeating, you know, the learning and the inferencing over and over again, it kind of like hurts us as humanity. So I'm hoping there is some like initiative as a global coalition that can unite us through the continents and has like more open standards, which is why I was talking about like open source models need to be defined properly. And there's like work being done there, but they need funding too. So, you know, it's up to us, companies like Civo and Intuit, like having to fund these initiatives and kind of get the industry in the right direction as well.
Numa, I want to pick on you here from an academic point of view, because I think traditionally this is something that academia has always led the way in, and actually I think some of the challenges here. I mean, what are some of the things that you think make a really good kind of cross-project with these particular types of domains?
I think academic partnerships are actually a really good way to start collaborating globally. But I think some of the challenges, like you mentioned, are around the fact that I think a lot of jurisdictions are now starting to kind of define their own policies and regulations, and that's what makes it a little bit harder to collaborate now, right? Because it's really hard to kind of work across jurisdictions for things like privacy or certain kinds of like AI risks and models. I really do hope we start to see more of that, especially kind of around things like, especially things like, I don't know, like AI evaluation, building more efficient models. I think those would be really, really great things to kind of do across jurisdictions. I also just think that there is a lot of risk with a lot of these models maybe being developed in Western countries, or a lot of this just being so concentrated in Silicon Valley. And we do want to make sure that we are building AI systems that do benefit you know, the global population. We've already seen a lot of instances of it not being as useful to people who are not in Western countries, just with like the data sets that we use, or how biased the data is. And I think a lot of research kind of in those spaces, working with kind of different countries together would, I think, be really great.
Yeah, adding to that, yeah, there will be a lot of restriction from different countries and different continents across this. But the problem I could think can be solved is by maybe landing your workloads or the models within the data center of your region and put those boundaries and continue to do the inference over that region itself and ensure that your data is secured and within the within your region boundaries.
We have seen some really unusual collaborations here as well. Like Microsoft did a Western language tuned version of DeepSeek, which I think ended up quite being popular with US companies. I think that in itself actually shows that people really care where their model comes from. Traditionally, open source software, we've never really worried about country of origin. Do you guys think that's a growing trend? Do you think we're going to see more interest in kind of domestically made models using US models for US companies?
I think it will happen with transparency. Right now, the LLMs are a black box. So if I ask ChatGPT something, I don't know what's happening behind the scenes, what data is reading, where is the data sets from. And that's what's causing people to have that hesitation to say, oh, this model's coming from this country and it has these biases or these issues. So there has to be some way of the models being transparent. Like it needs to tell you, here's the answer, but here's what I based your answer off of. And I attended a AI human-centered design session earlier as well, and they talked about the same thing where it needs to be like more, like humans need to trust AI, and for that to happen, there has to be transparency. And I think, when ChatGPT added the thinking section, which you can expand and see like what it's thinking about, that automatically gave people more confidence on what's happening behind the scenes. Now there has to be more features like that show you like what's happening behind the scenes, not just to the developer, but to actually the user who's asking these questions, so that they can trust and not worry about like, politics or geopolitical issues being in the model itself as long as it's transparent.
Just to kind of piggyback off of that, I think that's a really good point about transparency because I think it's less about where the model is trained, right? The country of origin of training, and more so just the risks with the model itself. So it really doesn't matter where it's trained as long as whoever trains it is transparent about the data that was used, the architecture it was trained on, and it is actually open sourced. That being said, I think a lot of the risks do kind of come from at least like a cybersecurity perspective around just from authoritarian kind of nation states, where I think the concern is just kind of around what kind of data it is being trained on and if that is being echoed and amplified in those models. But again, if we have more transparency around what that looks like, then it doesn't actually matter what it's trained.
Yeah, I would say the transparency is kind of key there. As long as you know what it's all about, like even if you go out to utilize DeepSeek, right, from the CCP, you already know that it has some biases, right? The same goes for us. I mean, the models we have biases in them as well. It's all based on the training data. Unless we build that transparency layer in, we're not going to really know what to really expect out of it. Because as it was talked about before, like we can't look in these models and look at the data that's in there. We don't even know the decisions on why it's making the decisions after it's been trained. But if we can open up that transparency and understand how they built it, what their training data is, it's going to give us a much bigger competency level in it, and it's going to give us the collaborated trust that we need with AI to be able to move it forward.
I think that's a really good takeaway, actually. It's probably not about country of origin. It's about transparency, reproducibility, understanding the supply chain of your software. I think that's something we've been doing as software professionals for a really long time and thinking about. I think there's definitely something in there as well around making sure you own the workload and understand the workload. Would you guys say that if you wanted to do that, you have to use an in-source technology? Do you think that at some point these outsourced providers like OpenAI and Claude will give us transparency for their data?
I think that if they do, they will probably lose their competitive edge, and that's why their data sets are not released. So I think it would actually be really hard for them to stay very competitive and be fully transparent about what goes into their training data.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is each one of these companies building these frontier models are on a race to AGI or ASI, and they don't want to necessarily give you all the secret sauce. But sometimes they'll open source their last model or the model that was last year's model, which at least it pulls a little bit of that transparency on those models. But I would agree it's going to be very difficult, especially on those brand new frontier models, because they do need that competitive edge, or I should say there is that race to AGI or ASI, that they're not necessarily going to want to say, hey, here's all my secrets, but I don't know this other organization's secrets, and they just take my secrets, combine them up, and I'll now have a better model than I do.
No, I think that's really interesting. OpenAI recently committed to open sourcing one of the, it's funny to even say that, OpenAI are open sourcing their model. They've committed to releasing some of their older models they're not using in production anymore. And I think that itself could be a really good opportunity for collaboration, sharing progress. People say the DeepSeek model borrowed some parts from Llama, and Llama borrowed some parts from DeepSeek, and maybe that's a future where everyone wins. I think fascinating. Anything else to add to that before we... No problem at all. I think moving into like the last 15 minutes here, it'd be really good to take any questions from the audience. You've got a unique opportunity here to take some fielded questions from experts from across the UK. Anyone particularly for the first question?
So when do you think we're going to see our first AI language, as opposed to semantic or having to deal with any of the other idiosyncrasies of all the different languages, where we just have these models can actually generate something that they just understand, and we don't really have to deal with it anymore?
So I'm going to say probably soon. I mean, I think there was a recent video of two computers talking to each other, and they kind of moved into, and I can't remember the actual language it was. Now, that language was developed by humans, but it was a much faster protocol for machines to talk to machines. If you actually listen to it, and you are of my age, it sounded like dial-up. So there's probably half the people in here don't know or remember what that sounded like, but you can go Google that. But I do think it's going to be soon. I think it'll probably be an emergent technology that comes out. I can't tell you if it's 3 to 5 years, but it does seem like it should be able to happen.
Yeah, I think it's already there. I think, what is the internet if the machines are not talking to each other, right? So it's like, do we just want a different one? That's okay, we can want a different one. But when, as you go lower in the stack, like ultimately, again, it comes to the binary language, right? So that's what's being passed over the wires. So is that bad? Like, do we need another one, like not binary, is my question. Because ultimately, even if we come up with a language, let's say the dial-up one, it's converting the noises to some sort of bits and then transmitting. So why not just use the bits?
Well, today you prompt with a specific language you want, right? So when do you get to the point where you prompt, you don't care about the language, and then it just cares about the hardware that it's going to run on, and it optimizes everything based on the environment it's going to run on. So it knows all the details about performance and speed and memory constraints and everything of the sort, where you're actually going to run that code. Where as a human, you might not know all the idiosyncrasies of the hardware, but the tools will. And so when you get to the point where you can just have a conversation and actually create something that is totally optimized, and you don't care what the language is, it's all you never care. It's just going to be hidden. So that's what I was asking, is when do we get to that?
Yeah, I've not seen a horizon on that, but I'll go back to my last answer. I think it can happen, although the answer over here is great. I mean, it's binary language. We don't understand that either.
Yeah, and in terms of do we care what language is it? It's up to the person too, because there are vibe coders out there that chat with the computer, something comes up, and they don't care it's React or Rust or what it is. It works. I don't know what Rust is, but I've built an app on Rust. So that happens. And as a human, sometimes you're just intellectually curious. You're like, what is happening behind the scenes? Let me look up, and then you find out, oh, it wrote Rust code here and did this and did that. It would be actually counterintuitive if it came up with new languages every time that you ask stuff, because then when things go wrong, even the AI needs to figure out what went wrong, rather play by the book of language rules or whatever, and it's easier to understand for it too in the future.
Yeah, I'd say that's an interesting question. And one other angle is technically these large language models are using tokens, and they're not really words, right? So they're words translated to tokens, and then the tokens are used within the large language model and converted back to words. So one maybe could argue that it's already doing that.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
that's kind of a stretch. I know where you're going with your question, and I think it goes beyond that. But it'll be interesting to see how this whole thing evolves.
Yeah, adding to this in a different perspective. So maybe prompt engineering is something that we need to look into more, how we communicate with the model with a better language that model can actually like give you the best output that you expect. But down the line, when models become more mature or much better, they're anyway better, but when they become much more better, I think they're going to handle that as well. Converting these prompts into the tokens in the better way that they understand and give you the best output possible.
Next question.
Yeah. Along the same lines, I just want to maybe take your take because you work at ARM. And have you heard of this concept called MLIR-based languages versus LLVM style languages? And there are lots of new languages like Mojo, JAX, and things like that for writing deep learning code that are popping up. Where do you think this landscape is going to go? Where should people invest? Because we spend a lot of time optimizing the machine learning models for deployment versus like developing the models themselves. And there is like a big gap between research and production. When things go from research to production, they often don't perform as well. And you have to like do lots of surgical techniques like distillation, optimization, things like that. So just your take on that front, yeah.
Yeah, actually, thanks for bringing up. So with respect to that, mostly the inter-representative format that you convert your, maybe the model or the data. So it all depends upon the ecosystem and the developers and the frameworks that are more popular, getting popularity. So I see like PyTorch putting a lot of maybe an essence in terms of like open source across all the hardware and across all the models and across all the frameworks. So with respect to that, everything are gonna evolve, like all that you mentioned, like the JAX, MLIR, all things gonna still keep going on. But the one which is getting like more easiness with the developers, gonna thrive in the race. Adding to this, like yeah, we keep doing things like optimizing things to our hardware for every other framework. Like we have like Onyx, we have like PyTorch, we have like llama.cpp, etc. So we keep doing for every other framework out there because some companies or the businesses or the developers land upon using maybe a particular framework. They cannot move out of it for multiple reasons. So these things gonna still go down the line, but the one which gets more popularity for its easiness gonna thrive in the race. So yeah, I could think of like VLLM, which is getting more famous, or like more. They do like more of like batch computing or batch inference in the better way possible than any other framework out there. So yeah, things like that come in, but the one which is more adapted or gain popularity for their easiness and other reasons gonna thrive in the race.
All right, next question right here on this side.
So my question is related to energy efficiency. Right? You were talking about moving the models to the edge, and then we can save more energy. But we know the energy principle. Energy can neither be created nor destroyed. So in a sense, what you are saying is don't consume the energy on the server, but consume the energy on the client, right, on mobile phones. But mobile phones also need to be charged. They also consume energy. So how you are actually saving the energy?
I can start. There's two parts of it. One is like, the model will become smaller. When it's on the cloud, you're inclined to making LLM calls, large language model calls, and it's just an API call, so like it doesn't feel like a lot happening, but behind the scenes, you end up using a lot more. Like, they just spent $20K. If they were running their own servers, they would have to install more or figure out like how to, make sure that everybody can do what they want to do. So that's one, like it's just convenience. And the second is you're passing on the cost to the consumer. People are I know charging your phone doesn't cost you much, but over time, like as more and more devices use them, they cost you in battery life. So I'm hoping people are, when they directly see the cost of what they're doing, I'm hoping that that's a behavioral change that we can drive because the cost is directly onto them when they use these things. And they'll realize their phone gets hot if they do a lot of it. and the battery is running so fast. So maybe I'm not going to ask AI to do everything. So that's a behavioral bet. I don't know if it's going to happen, but that's why I thought about that.
Okay. So another question is, will it make sense to have more of mixture of expert models, which can handle more domains rather than limited to certain domains? That way we can reduce the computation within the model itself to save the energy.
I think that really just comes down to the use case that you're trying to do, right? I know a lot of the things that we're doing today, I mean, a lot of it's categorizing certain things that are coming in. So like if it's a incident response type of situation and I want to be able to like look at all the details and then categorize it towards this team or that team and have AI do that, I don't need a reasoning model. I don't need a mixture of expert models. I can actually use a really tiny model for that. And when we first got into it, we were using the big frontier models. Of course, at that point, it was like 3.5, right? So maybe not so frontier anymore. But yeah, I mean, it's model choice, right? Like I was trying to mention earlier, I rarely use that deep research out of ChatGPT. I almost always use a smaller model in it first to kind of like queue everything up. And then when I think I have a decent plan, then I say, hey, go deep research this thing and like pull it all together. So even in those types of instances, I'm not trying to get deep research to do everything, right? I use a smaller model that I know it's good at doing X, Y, and Z. And even in like ChatGPT, it actually will tell you as you do a model drop-down selection, like this one's good at code, this one's good at math, this one's good at something else. It's using the right model for the right task, I think is going to be key.
Okay, right here.
So you were all talking about transparency as a way of understanding the validity of an answer, how correct it is. I'm curious if there are any emerging standards or models, lowercase m, to help us better understand what does that future look like. What is trustworthy? How do you know if it's a good answer or not? There's inherent biases, whether, just national biases depending on where a model was developed or maybe more importantly trained. How are we as users what will that look like? How are we going to understand when we've crossed that threshold and this is a good answer? Is it community notes? Is it, I don't know, is it knowing what the source is of the data? And how do you do that in a way that's not just a list of citations? Is it a good answer or is it not a good answer?
Yeah, I think it's going to have to come back to how the model is trained and be able to look at the training data. And the reason I say that is I believe OpenAI actually took away some of the thought process because other companies were starting to understand like how they were able to do some of the things they were doing. So they actually like took that away. But even if they kept it in, right, and then if all the models had it, which it really gave you the thought process, there's also papers out there on in-context scheming, which means that it is capable of doing things, even though it puts the thought process out there. It will actually give you a different answer even through that thought process, right? And so if you can think about that in-context scheming. Now, in-context scheming means like I've prompted it ahead of time to actually do that action that I'm talking about. But I do believe you can actually build in-context scheming or scheming into the model itself, where it's like being able to produce a thought process that isn't really the thought process that it's actually going to be doing in the end. So I think it all goes back to being able to understand how it was built and the training data that it was built on for those reasons.
I would agree with that. When I was talking about transparency, I really did mean what kind of data it's trained on, what the model architecture looks like, more so than, let me look at the reasoning process. All that's happening in kind of the reasoning process is it's just problem decomposition. All it's doing is chain of thought reasoning. It's not, I think, a good way to understand how transparent the model is, right? I think, sure, it is trying to essentially like break down whatever problem you have given it into multiple steps and then being able to solve it as step-by-step basis. I don't actually think that is like a good indicator of how good my response will be or what transparency should look like. I think the question you have is actually really good, and it's really, really hard to answer that because we don't actually have good ways to measure responses from models, and that's because a good response can actually look really different for different people or different use cases, and that's actually what makes general purpose models really hard to evaluate because you are trying to evaluate for every possible use case for every possible user, and that is kind of impossible to do. There's a lot of research going on in this space, and I think it'll be really interesting to see kind of where we end up, but I think it's a really good question, and I have it too.
Question right here.
Thanks. This question is mainly for Jimil, but others feel chime in. What do you see for the near and midterm future for the finance, accounting, bookkeeping, and tax preparation professions? And kind of on the inverse of that, how can small businesses, solopreneurs, people like that, reduce their costs and leverage AI for tax preparation, things like that? Yeah, what are your thoughts? Thanks.
Yeah, I think we have this product called Intuit Assist that is already available in TurboTax and QuickBooks. I think these personas that you mentioned will have amazing tools, which they did not have before. The tools will be able to explain complex accounting and tax situations where people, a lot of people get nervous. Like, I think that's one of the biggest challenges for people to file taxes. That's why they wait until the last moment, because they are not sure. So I think these tools are going to firstly educate them. Our journey is to go towards the done-for-you experiences. So the reason people hire a tax pro is they don't want to deal with it. They just want it done. Our vision is to create these done-for-you experiences for our customers through technology, not through a person, if possible, assisted by a person. So they always have access to a person. They can click a button, Zoom call, boom, and explaining like what's going on. We've already seen people like using ChatGPT and stuff like that, like asking these kinds of questions. But these are like more trained towards the use cases, so these are more specialized. And in the future, like if you have used TurboTax and if you file taxes with it, it will say like, here's how much you owe and here's why, because you made this much and your spouse made this much. And so it's getting to a state where it's explaining and making these like highly complicated situations more simpler for laymen. So I think it's just all good things. Ultimately, AI is going to make us more money, I hope. It will give us insights about our finances that, hey, you're spending too much here. And since it's AI, you can't shrug it off because, it's not a person telling you. So it'll tell you that, hey, you need to do this better, that better, given your spending. So financial literacy, it will help with. It will help with complex accounting, financial tasks, and hopefully it makes us more money through all of that, and it makes your subscription or payment for these tools worthwhile as well.
Okay, we are at time. Is it a really good question? Like really good?
I don't know how good it is.
All right, we'll give it to you. One last question.
So one of the strengths I can see in AI is pattern recognition, which could be super useful in large data sets. But as far as that could be used in site reliability to kind of analyze things. But on the other hand, I see one of the weaknesses often when people kind of plug something into a language learning model is it's really good at giving believable answers. So how do you fight between getting data that has meaning versus something that just seems to have meaning with AI?
Yeah, at the end of the day, you have to understand how it derived its data. Even in preparation for the talks that I do, I usually use a lot of generative AI to do that type of stuff. But if I said, hey, just give me a talk, it would be not very personalized, and it wouldn't always make a lot of sense. It's got to be authored, and it has to be from someone, right? So as you're using it, it really needs to be able to derive you cited sources for you to be able to go verify the information. one of the traps we get into, especially with Gen AI, and I think this kind of goes back to some of the other answers, especially when it starts doing math, is right now Gen AI is all the buzzword, and everybody wants to use Gen AI for everything, right? So it's the big hammer in the room, and everything's a nail. Well, not everything is a nail. Sometimes it's a screw, and you have to use traditional AI to get there. So a more predictive model is better in those types of systems, right? Versus a generative AI model, which is non-deterministic, right? So whenever you have those non-deterministic systems, you have to really understand the context that's going into it, what it's telling you, and be able to verify it. And it has to kind of make sense to you, right? So I typically don't trust it. I really don't trust it with math.
I think one thing I found to be useful is ask another model of the same question and see if it comes up with a different answer. Imagine there is an agent that asks all the 4 big models and then sees the answers from all 4, reconciles them, and makes its own opinion. So although it's opposite to like the sustainability conversation we've had, but you know, you can do it, and that will, like, it's like models checking each other. And you know, trying to come up with a, and if 4 models cannot get it together, like I feel like, you know, you might not also be able to get it together. So we might be in the same boat, like as a human doing the same things.
Although I'd still add to that, we are still at the phase where the human in the loop is absolutely critical.
For sure, yes.